Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. Hang on, let me adjust something here. There we go. All right, so welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States. Now we have available for you, if you are on our newsletter list, the 20th anniversary edition of Patriots History of the United States. So how do you get on the newsletter list? Go on the Wild World of History and scroll way down. You got to scroll way down, and you'll see a box that says sign up for our newsletter. You sign up, and you should automatically get a copy of the 20th anniversary edition of Patriots History. If within a day or so you don't, email me at Larry@Wild World History and say, hey, I signed up for the newsletter and I still don't have my copy, and I'll send that to you. We are coming to the end of the convention season. Let's see, where are we? Today is, I'm recording this on Saturday, June 29th. So a week from Thursday, I start the last convention of the season, which will be the Great Homeschool Convention in Austin at the Kalahari Resort. So if you're planning on going, make sure you stop by my booth and say hi. If you're not planning on going, maybe plan on going if you're in the region. So our special offer on the curriculum of $199 will remain in place through that weekend. And then after the 15th of July, it's gone. And you'll be paying full price for the curriculum. I know a lot of you want to push off some of these decisions till closer to school year. I understand not wanting to spend money early, but believe me, it's worth $100 or so to you to get it done sooner. So just check that out. We have a full curriculum in U.S. and world history. U.S. has 22 lessons, with me teaching every lesson in video, as well as, of course, the teacher's guide, student guide, tests, workbooks, all of that. And the world history course has 15 units. They're much bigger, so you're going to be doing about a unit every 2 weeks as opposed to a unit every week with Patriots history, with U.S. history. Anyway, check those out. And if you want more politics, go over to my Wild World of Politics site and sign up for the Insider. Only $6 a month. You can get my political analysis 3 times a week. And just recently, I've done some doozies on, for example, why I think they cannot drop Biden from the ticket. I think there's not enough time left, and I give you a whole explanation of why that is. We went through the debate before the debates. Just a lot of stuff, polling and other stuff. So take a look at that. All right. Let's get started here. So we are in the Civil War chapter. We're almost done. And we started last time with Lincoln's last days, and I am on page 365. Remember, if you have an earlier edition of Patriots History, the pages won't line up. If it's a much earlier edition, it's possible the headers won't line up because we changed a few headers. But if you got the 15th anniversary edition, we're going to be starting on page 365 at the very bottom of the page. Excuse me while I take a swig. Even Lincoln's death did not change one fact obvious to everyone. The North had won, and won decisively. According to historian James McPherson, the total defeat inflicted on the South by 1865, the Union forces had destroyed 2/3 of the assessed value of Southern wealth, 2/5 of the South's livestock, 1/4 of her white men between ages 20 and 40. More than half the farm machinery was ruined, and the damages to railroads and industries were incalculable. Southern wealth decreased by 60%. Now, I don't know what else McPherson included in that analysis. But you've got to remember that slaves were wealth prior to the Civil War. So by virtue of the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, the 2 to 3 million slaves in the South vanished off the books as assets. They were just gone. They weren't replaced by anything. They were just literally converted from property into people. And so that also had to be calculated. And like I say, I don't know if McPherson included that. To that could be added the thorough destruction of the Southern banking system and region-wide dissolution of the social structure based on slavery. What was reaffirmed in the conflict? America's Civil War proved once again the fact of American exceptionalism. While Lincoln unquestionably did not dispatch troops in 1861 to free slaves or to change state laws toward the peculiar institution, the underlying and fundamental cause of Southern animus was slavery and nothing else. The war, after 2 years, affirmed that it was ultimately and overwhelmingly about the idea of freedom, whether one group of people could restrict the God-given liberty of others. Contrary to the perpetrators of the lost cause story, once the Southerners saw the war on their doorstep, their defense of states' rights and principles all but vanished, as the Confederacy increasingly toyed with the notion of emancipating its own slaves if they would fight for the CSA. The first such recommendations came in February 1861, but most officials dismissed them. By mid-1863, however, after Vicksburg fell, the Confederacy suddenly entertained arguments about emancipation. Quote, "Cannot we who've been raised with our Negroes and know how to command them make them more efficient than the Yankees can?" asked one proponent of arming the slaves. The lost cause myth took root during Reconstruction, with pro-Southern writers emphasizing the corruption of federal occupation and the helplessness of white citizens against the power of the federal government by the proportionally large numbers of blacks who went to the polls. Neo-Confederate writers' imaginative attempts to portray the antebellum South as a utopia were outrageously distorted and ultimately destructive. They planted in a large number of Southerners, though not the majority, the notion that the Confederacy had fought for important moral principles, and they had labored to move the argument away from slavery. Modern-day voices of the lost cause who received new support after the fall of the Dixiecrats in the 1960s came from libertarians who, for the most part, viewed the Union government as more oppressive than the Confederacy, emphasizing the infractions against civil and economic liberties by the Union government during and after the war. This view has maintained a dedicated but small group of adherents. To these lost cause proponents, Lincoln remains the ultimate monster, a tyrant whose thirst for power enabled him to provoke the South into firing on Fort Sumter. Had he only let the lower Confederacy secede, their argument goes, the remaining United States would have embarked on a golden age of liberty in the South eventually, because of market forces, claim the Libertarians, or its own noble character, as the Neo-Confederates assert, would have emancipated the slaves. These views are as deceptive as they are erroneous. Virtually no evidence exists to suggest that the South would have peacefully emancipated slaves. Indeed, since slavery was supported with the power of a Confederate government fully behind it, the institution could have survived for decades, if not perpetually. Slavery existed in some empires in the world for centuries and still exists in parts of the Arab world today. It was seldom voluntarily eradicated from within. Equally as destructive is the notion that the states or principalities could choose their own terms when it suited them to be in the Union. Equally perverse is the Neo-Marxist New Left interpretation of civil war as merely a war to, quote, retain the enormous national territory and market resources of the United States. Reviving the old Charles Beard interpretations of the triumph of capitalism over an agrarian society, leftist critics find themselves in agreement with the more radical libertarian writers. Whereas the Neo-Confederates harken back to an imaginary world of benign masters and happy slaves, The leftist critics complained that Lincoln was too conservative and blocked genuinely radical and, to them, positive redistribution of not only plantation owners' wealth, but all wealth. It's preposterous for Marxists to assert that capitalism enslaved free employees. Quite the contrary, the only hope many Southern blacks had once the Yankee armies had left for good in 1877 was the free market, where the color of money could overcome and subdue black-white racism. The government, and not the market, perpetuated Jim Crow. The government, not the market, enforced union minimum wage laws that excluded blacks from entry-level positions. And the government, not the market, passed and enforced separate but equal segregation laws. The market, freed from interference by racist Southern state regulations, would have desegregated the South decades before Martin Luther King Jr., the Freedom Riders, Harry Truman, Earl Warren, and the Civil Rights Act. America's Civil War was ultimately and overwhelmingly about the idea of freedom, whether one group of people could restrict the God-given liberties of others. That the Republicans, in their zeal to free slaves, enacted numerous ill-advised taxes, railroad and banking laws, and regrettable, but nevertheless of minor consequence, is regrettable, but nevertheless of minor consequence in the big picture. In that regard, the South perverted classic libertarianism. Libertarianism did not pervert the South. A remarkable fact of the war, the United States divided almost evenly, fought for 4 bloody years, and never abandoned the concept of constitutional government. Quite the contrary, if one takes Southern rhetoric at face value, the war was over the definitions of that constitutionalism. But even if one rejects Southern arguments as rationalization for slavery, the astounding fact is that the Confederacy no sooner left the Union than it set up its own constitution, modeled in most ways on that of the United States, from which it seceded. In neither section, North or South, were elections suspended or most normal workings of civilian government abandoned. In neither section was there a coup d'etat. Indeed, both sides agreed that founding ideas were worth preserving. They just disagreed over the exact composition and priority of those ideas. And finally, rather than a contest about capitalism, the Civil War was a struggle over the definition of union. No concept of union can survive any secession any more than a body can survive the secession of its heart or lungs. The forging of the nation, undertaken in blood and faith in 1776 and culminating in the Constitution of 1787, brought the American people together as a single nation, not a country club of members who could choose to leave at the slightest sign of discomfort. The Civil War finalized that contract and gave to all men the promises of the Declaration and the purposes of the Constitution. And although hundreds of thousands paid the ultimate price for completing that process, what emerged truly one nation under God could never again be shattered from within. So that concludes Chapter 9, The Crisis of the Union, the American Civil War. Hope you found that useful and enlightening. And in our next episode, I will take up Reconstruction. So I will see you then.